Oh, it's a full house here at irishbreakdown.com. I'm Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. That guy right there is Ryan Roberts. He's the director of recruiting at Irish Breakdown. And that guy right there is the publisher at Irish Breakdown. That's Brian Driscoll.
We put Vince in the basement today, baby.
I know, right? I kind of like it. I'm the foundation. I'm just holding you guys up.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Point.
Well done. Well done. Good comeback, Vince. You're getting so much better at this. I love it.
I'm trying. It's the only way I stay afloat in my own house. So today we've got a great topic for you guys. We're going to talk some recruiting, specifically the defensive side of the ball in the 23 class. Brian, we've got a bunch of defensive commits already. I mean, are they running out of room at this point in this class?
Well, the good news for Notre Dame is, yes, they're off to a great start. You've got 7 defensive players already committed in this class. All 7 of them are ranked as rivals top 250 players. The insane thing is, Vince, I just have to throw this out there. There are 9 guys committed in this class. All 9 are now ranked in the rivals top 250. For context purposes, 5 of them are top 100 players. All of them on defense, by the way. The next closest team with guys in the top 250 period is Georgia with 6. After that, it's one team with 4, and then a bunch of teams with 3 of top 250 players. Notre Dame has 5 top 100 players in the class, right? 3 in the top 40. So it's an impressive group. The good news for Notre Dame when you look at the defensive class, though Vince, and Ryan and I will discuss this during the show, is, and we've mentioned this recently, Notre Dame expects this to be a big class. So they look at it as the 2023 class, in my opinion. And I don't know, Ryan, if you have an opinion on this yet, since it's you kind of hit the ground running and had to focus so much on this class. Mm-hmm. This is a really good class comparatively to classes around it at a lot of positions and at a lot of the positions that Notre Dame needs to have success in. So this is, to me, a great quarterback class. It's an excellent receiver class. I mean, an incredibly deep receiver class. You know, there's like 8-9 guys on the board that are like, yeah, that's a top 100 guy. Yeah, that's a top 100 guy. Yeah, that's a top 100 guy. You know, corner. I think this is a really good safety class, and it's a year that Notre Dame needs safeties. And there have been some not good safety classes in recent years nationally. So I think, and then, you know, a year where it's not a great year, is it like linebacker? It's not a great year at linebacker like it was last year. Well, that's okay because Notre Dame doesn't really have a numbers need at linebacker.
Right.
So, I think those are some of the things where, like offensive line, I don't think this is a great offensive line class, but it's strong in areas that Notre Dame tends to do well. There's a lot of Midwestern kids. There's some Northeastern kids, things along those lines. So I think for Notre Dame, there's still plenty of room. They're not full anywhere at this point in time. Now, at linebacker, and we'll get into this, you could say if they don't get anyone else, are they okay? Yeah, they're fine. But even there, they're going to do it. But I think the nice thing about this is, Ryan, is Notre Dame's strong start from a numbers and talent standpoint has allowed them to really narrow their board and start to zero in on some dudes. And I think that strong start makes it even more likely that you're going to get just as strong of a finish. And I think that, to me, Ryan, is the thing that puts Notre Dame in a really unique position right now.
Yeah, and I think that obviously we're focusing on defensive recruiting, but that goes to both sides of the ball so far in 2023. I feel like they have at most positions already, especially on defense, a baseline to the class, right? Like if you ended the class with Keon Keeley and Brendan Vernon, for instance, at defensive line, you would feel fantastic. But the fact that now you can take some shots at some heavy hitters and at linebacker now, you have a Preston Zinter, who mentioned top 250 kid that just committed. You had Drake Bowen, in-state player for Notre Dame that was already committed. Now that you have the opportunity to take the best of what you want and not have to fish for a need, I think that speaks volumes to what the start that they've gotten onto. And it's going to be exciting to see. And I feel lucky, to be honest, to start in this cycle, because it could be a historic one for Notre Dame in recent years, to say the least.
Ryan, I'm going to take from like where your heart and passion still is, which is the draft. I feel like Notre Dame is now in a situation where they're like that NFL team that kind of has they were really good. They're picking like 30th, 29th, and everybody's coming back. So the draft is just kind of like, well, let's just take the best guy there, you know? I mean, and I think that's the situation that Notre Dame finds themselves at this point in time.
Yeah. Things start becoming a little bit of a luxury at this point, right? Because you got the players already that you're super excited about. And now you could take the swing at some of the big hitters, like you're saying, Brian. So I agree completely. It's shaping up to be a great class, and it's exciting both from, I mean, especially on the defensive side of the ball when we're talking about, hey, defensive line-wise, you've already gotten 2 top 50 caliber football players, one that's a bona fide 5-star recruit in Keon Keeley. Linebacker, like I mentioned, you got guys like Zinter, you got Drake Bowen, who's a borderline 5-star, top 40 player in the class. You got Justin Rhett, who by some is a top 50, top 60 player on recruiting platforms, but also could have a higher ceiling than that when you're talking about a height, weight, speed type of combination. You have a guy like Peyton Bowen, who I think is a potential top 5 player if he takes a next step next season. So you have dudes everywhere. You've hit on several needs, and now you can continue to add what is outstanding quality of talent in this class. Not just quality of depth, quality of talent at the top.
All right, fellas. So let's jump right in. We'll go position by position where you think the needs are, where they need to go from here. Are they good at that position? Like for linebacker, for example, where are they with their needs? So let's start at the front. Defensive line, Brian, where are they with defensive line? Obviously, they have really good ends. Where do they go from here? Do they need to add on?
Well, the one thing for sure is they're good at Viper right now. You got Aiden Goldbyron in last year's class. You have Keon Keeley in this year's class. I think the presence of Brennan Vernon and Tyson Ford in back-to-back classes really gives Notre Dame some unique things to consider, because I think both of them right now are big ends, but both of them have kind of those thick Midwestern frames that say they may not always be big ends, right? Or they may be big ends, right? I mean, they may be like, in recent years, Notre Dame's big ends, if I think Adi Ryan was 255 coming out of Notre Dame, Myron was 260, 265. I mean, Tyson Ford's got a 275 to 285 pound body. Brennan Vernon's got a 275 to 285 pound body. And so you're going to have some more size there, but the point is there's some interchangeableness. So I think Notre Dame is still in a situation where they don't have to just take a guy that's a pure interior guy. And I think that's where you kind of slide into, a Jason Moore type of situation. But I think Notre Dame is in a situation where they need big guys. Now, whether that's another big end that can kind of, play some 3 technique and that type of thing, I think that's where they should shoot. But I also think they need to make sure they recruit a guy that can bring some size to the nose guard position. And again, Notre Dame is not looking for a 6'2", 330-pound nose guard. That's not what this defense is looking for. But that doesn't mean that you need a bunch of Donovan and Kurt Heinisches either. I mean, there's a middle ground to that. And Ryan, to me, this is when we talk about this D-line class. I see a legitimate dream class situation. And we talked about dream class and ideal situation. I think defensive line, this is one where Notre Dame has a legitimate shot to get sort of that dream class, which to me is Keon Keeley, Brennan Vernon, Jason Moore, and Devin Houston. What say you?
Yeah, now, I've been on the Jason Moore bandwagon for a little bit since I first watched him for the Matha Catholic down there in Maryland. He is, for me, when you're a Notre Dame defense that wants to play so much between even and odd man fronts, you need length on the defensive line. And I think that's what a guy like a Jason Moore brings to the game at 6'6". I've seen him listed at 255. I've heard he's closer to 270 range already. And I think that he could steadily hold 290 plus, and he could be somebody that's in that Stephon Tuitt type of role. Yeah. And Stephon was gifted enough of an athlete where he could play out to 5'6" head up on a tight end. He could do those types of things, right? But also moving inside the 3, then he becomes a absolute difference maker with that length and that athleticism working inside. And I see that with a Jason Moore. I think that he can play strong side defensive end early, but eventually I think that he's going to just kind of continue to grow into that frame where he's going to be a dynamic 3-tech, 4-4-eye type player. That's what I see with a guy like a Jason Moore.
So, Ryan, when you talk about so to me, I think the value is the fact that Jason Moore and Brennan Vernon aren't necessarily competing against each other. I think that's the key. And I think that's what you're getting at too. Whether or not Jason, because there's a chance Jason Moore just doesn't get any bigger. He may just refine some stuff, doesn't get any bigger. And he's more of a big end. But then at the same time, there's just as much of a chance that Brennan Vernon keeps going and going and going and going because he's a big, thick Midwestern Ohio kid, and he ends up becoming a 3 technique. The point is, between the two of them, they're not guys that you put at D end and say, it's Khalid and Adi in 2019, right, where they really play the same position. This is a situation where not just on nickel, but in base downs, between those two body types, one of them is going to get bigger. One of them is going to get to 290 plus. Like I'm not ready to bet my mortgage on which one that's going to be, or maybe both of them. But I think that one of them will, which again, and also too, their unique skill sets. Like they're both big, strong-handed, kids that can block, destruct. They can play together. And I think that is an important thing, because if you just load up on talented DNs that do the exact same things, yeah, you're going to have a great rotation, but you can't play them together. And I think that's the thing I like about Jason Moore is there's, even in a 3-down, if one of those two kids grows like we think they're going to grow, there's 3-down situations where those three kids, Keon, Jason, and Brennan, are on the field together. That to me is just as important as, like, it's cool for us to talk about recruiting rankings and, for rivals, Keon's 14, Brennan's 17, Jason Moore's like 40 something, like that's fun to talk about. But those are 3 guys for 2 positions. That doesn't mean as much. If that's 3 guys for 3 positions, that has an even bigger impact. And I think that's also, Ryan, why Devin Houston is the guy that I love as that 4th guy in this class, that I would target in my dream class, because he, to me, is, I think what Notre Dame is doing is they're looking for, I think they're almost like they're taking a page out of the old Lou Holtz playbook, in that, recruit big ends and turn them into D tackles, recruit D tackles and turn them into nose guard, recruit big linebackers and turn them into ends. That's kind of what they're doing in some ways. And Devin Houston, to me, is a guy that is sort of like a 3-tech that you're going to grow into a nose, because of the way that Notre Dame uses their nose, which is more of a penetrating, disruptive playmaking position. You don't need a Lewis Nix. You don't need a 6'2", 330-pound guy. You need a guy that can make plays. And that's, to me, Ryan, why Devin Houston is just that ideal 4th guy in this class for me. I don't know what you think about that. I think you and I agree on this.
Yeah, no, I think when I put out like the ideal class, early on, probably a few weeks ago now, I put Devin Houston in that class. And I mean, to speak to the Brennan Vernon, Jason Moore layer, right? Like, I do think that they are both have interchangeable skill sets that could work for multiple alignments. But I think Devin Houston also, you could sell me on him being the 3-tech in the defense, but eventually I think that nose tackle is the best spot, because I think when you talk about how he wins best on film, I see outstanding pad level, I see outstanding play strength, I see the ability to gain lockout at the point of attack, and I see, in my opinion, to be a one-gap shooter. I think that he has incredible potential there, because I think linearly he's a very explosive kid. Now, I don't know if he's the most flexible of all time, which is why I think, just from a body typing perspective, he's going to grow out of the edge role very quickly, right? Like, he's not going to be the same guy that we're seeing at St. James School. If you told me that he was 280 right now, I'd believe you, because I think that he's a really strong trunk type of kid. And I think that he could play well over 300 pounds at 6'4" and some change. And I think that he's a guy that is going to be a tough task. 1-to-1 situations, you're going to have to put 2 on him. And when you have 2 with that type of linear ability, eventually in an ideal world, you're talking about Jason Moore, Brendan Vernon, Keon Keeley getting some 1-on-1s. There's going to be 1-on-1s somewhere. And when you're talking about this type of dream class with this much talent, it's exciting to think about how this defensive line could really match up together and could play together. I think that's the most exciting part, is that I think it all fits together really well.
And that's the need. I think 4 is the need. I think they could take a 5th guy in Kate
but it has to be the right fit, don't you think? Like,
it has to be the right fit, and I think it also has to come down to what happens with the current roster. Because again, what we got to remember is they're not a pure 4-down defense anymore. Meaning you're not going to have like 3 deep at 4 positions necessarily. It is not necessarily the number need anymore. And so I think that factors into it as well. You got 3 last year. You got 3 the year before that are still left on the roster: Onye, Gabriel Rubio, and then Will Schweitzer. I think this is a year where 4 is the need. You could take a 5th if it's the right guy, but I think 4 is the ideal target for this particular class. Because again, you want to try to avoid getting into those years where you overload on numbers, because you end up losing one of those guys.
Right.
And that's kind of what I like. I think you take that 4 with last year's 3 on a defense that's going to switch between 3 and 4 down. That's a healthy spot, in my opinion. A real healthy spot.
Now, the next position group, we're going front to back. The next position group is the one I'm really interested to hear what your opinion is about linebacker, because obviously they got numbers last year, and those were quality numbers. I mean, those are 4 guys that are all very, 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 very good. They're sitting at 2 right now, right? I believe. And so what do they need to add? Are they good where they're at? What say you, Brian Driscoll?
I think they're fine if they end it where they are.
Okay.
And again, it's kind of like we said about the defensive line is at times they're going to have 3 linebackers on the field. At times they're going to have 2 linebackers on the field, right? At times they may have 4. I mean, so it's going to be a little bit of a unique defense. I think 2 is they're fine, but they're not stopping at 2, right? So there's a difference. Like and what that does is that allows them to really focus on sort of the top guys on the board. Like there's some good players that they've pretty much dropped. They're not really recruiting Phil Pichot anymore. When you're comfortable enough with where you are that you stop recruiting a kid like that, you're doing pretty good linebacker. So you got 4 guys last year. You also have to remember too that the plan is that Kahanu Kia plans to come back to Notre Dame after his 2-year mission.
From his mission, yeah.
Correct. So you kind of got to look at him as like a down. He's going to have an impact on numbers for the 2023 class, assuming that the staff is high on him. And considering that they played him and he was sort of in the 2 deep almost at one point in time last year with some injuries, that's obviously a situation where, okay, they're in a good place numbers wise because they love. I mean, I've talked to a couple sources on this, and like, hey, how do you feel about all 4 of the kids? And they're like, man, all these kids are everything. They all got better seniors. They, we love it. And these are people that have in the past kind of told me like, yeah, this kid's a good player, but we're not sure he's an impact guy. And they love all those guys. And I think with Prince Collie in 2021, you look at 2 and you're talking about 7 guys in 3 years. I don't think that's ideal, which is like, it's not like a perfect world scenario, but the reality is you're 2 deep at all 3 of your linebacker spots and you're 3 deep at 1. And I think when you also look at it, there's the thought that some of the guys in the current roster, like Maris Luafau, has multiple years of eligibility left because of COVID. Right. And so I think you look at that situation too. I think they're comfortable with their numbers based on the fact that this is not a great linebacker class nationally. So what they're focusing on right now, Ryan, is there's some dudes on the board that they're still on. I mean, when you talk about Jaiden Ausberry, Samuel Mpemba, guys like that, there's some guys on the board that they're going to say, hey, look, Tamir Robinson they like. There's Darren Gillette that they like. Those guys, if they can find the guy that they see as being either a really top player now or a guy with a really high ceiling, they're going to still recruit those guys. But the board just got a lot smaller, which I think, in my opinion, increases the odds that you get one of those guys at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I agree completely to that sentiment. And I think that it's really interesting. You mentioned Gillette and you mentioned Ausberry and Pemba, Tamir Robinson. They're all guys that, and with the addition of Preston Zinter, you're not taking a guy that projects potentially as a Mike only, right? Like you need a guy that can fit into kind of that Will Rover mold, right? Like that's kind of the guy you need.
I would argue they're looking for Rover to Will.
Rover to Will.
Like I know you weren't specifically saying that. I'm just adding to the point of Rover first, Will second is kind of what they're targeting. And when you look at the guys on the board that we just mentioned, Ryan, that fits to what you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah. And Tamir, Gillette, they're both high 4-star kids. Jaiden Ausberry is a top 50 potential kid. Samuel Mpemba, I think, is ranked as high as top 10 by some people, depending on what recruiting site you look at. So a lot of different body types, which I think is really interesting too, Brian. Like it's going to be a really fun debate because you see guys like Mpemba that's listed at like 6'4", 230, right? Who has some freaky flexibility, man, for his size. Like he can move a little bit. You don't see Rovers at that size too often, but like you could sell me on it, but definitely it will long term. Like there's no doubt about it. Tamir Robinson is another 6'4", 210-pound guy that's a really nice athlete, explosive. But then you get a Jaiden Ausberry who's around 6 foot, 205, somewhere in that ballpark, but he's an explosive hitter. I think you compared him to Jonathan Vilma, I believe, on a podcast, at least stylistically. Like,
I think that was that on a podcast or me and you talking. I
think that might have been a podcast.
Kind of bleed together.
Sure. they do bleed together, but I think it's just it's really fun to think about. How these guys are kind of being projected to similar roles, but their body types are so different. Just to kind of put into perspective how versatile I think this system can be, which I think is a lot of fun. I mean, if they were to hit on a guy like Mpemba or Jaiden Ausberry.
Oh, man.
It's exciting to say the least. And the other two too. I mean, Gillette and Tamir Robinson, like those guys would be takes for me. Either one of them.
And Tamir would have been even an earlier take had it not been for his October knee injury.
Sure.
That's the other thing is they need to see how he can't, because he was a guy they really liked early on, like because he was a converted safety. I mean, he was a safety as a sophomore in high school, right? He's exactly what they look for in a rover, like the big, long, rangy safety athlete that kind of grows into sort of a second level player. I think that's what they look for. And so I think the knee was the only question with him. And Ausberry is interesting too, because, this staff has made it very clear. They don't hide from anybody the fact that we want long athletes. Like you just look at up and down the board, I mean, just long dudes, right? Minimum 6'2". And if you're not going to be 6'2" like Jalen Sneed, you need to have go gadget arms like Jalen Sneed. And that's clearly what they're looking for. But what I love, however, so like Clark Lee was that way. Clark Lee liked really long guys. The problem with Clark Lee is he would to me take risks on guys just because they were long, like a Caleb Offord. And then he would pass on guys that are good football players because they weren't long. And the thing and I think that's for college where you can really get into some trouble is when you're not willing to overlook, hey, this guy doesn't have the measurables as far as length and height and those type of things, but he's a really good football player. And to me, that was a mistake that the previous staff made that this staff is not going to make. And we're seeing that with several players, and Jaiden Ausberry is one because Q-Kib's shown his youth. Go.
I'm telling you, man. Come on, man.
Q-Kibs, you just broke my heart, man. Like I want to
Inspector Gadget,
and just be like, I know it was you. You broke my heart. Go look up Inspector Gadget on YouTube, okay? And you'll know what we're talking about.
Classic,
right?
Man. Classic.
Yeah, but see, Ryan's in his 20s and he even knows who Inspector Gadget
30,
is.
30, but
you're 30 now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's an old man.
So young. Seems so youthful.
No, he is youthful. 30 is youthful.
Shut up, Bench. You're still in your 30s too. I don't want to hear it. All right.
No, I'm not.
But,
You're not? I'm 41.
You're 41? Get out of here.
Believe me, I didn't want it to be true, but it is.
All right. See, you guys just look so young. See, that's how old I am. Like, you guys look so young to me.
Yeah.
Back to the conversation before Q-Kibs got us all messed up. I love the fact that with Jaiden Ausberry, they're saying, look, he's not tall like we like. He's not long like we like. I should have said that reversed. He's not long like we like. He's not tall like we like. He doesn't have a frame where he's going to be 240 pounds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? This kid can play, and this kid can run. And they've made him a priority. Now, the odds of them getting Jaiden Ausberry are really slim at this point in time. I mean, but the point is, because you have Zinter and Drake Bowen, two guys you like a lot, and with Zinter, a guy that you like so much that you passed on some other guys, you're now in a position where you can take, and the fact that numbers-wise, you got, and this is why the 4 last year is so important. Because now you don't have to worry about depth pieces. You've met your needs for numbers. You can now say, hey, look, we're going to swing for the fences. Even a kid like an Anthony Hill, right? Like he's just came out with a top 6 and Notre Dame's not in it. There's no reason that you technically have to stop recruiting him because if you don't get him, so what? You're fine. Now, I'm not saying that they should necessarily do that because I think there's a time when you're kind of wasting your resources on a guy that you just know you're not going to get. But Jaiden Ausberry is an even better example because Ryan, if you and I are picking right now, we're not going to – if we were to say, hey, who are the top 3 options that you think for Jaiden Ausberry? I don't think either one of us would put Notre Dame in that top 3 right now. No. But he listens, he talks to them, and he's yet another in a long line of players that completely blows this notion of, you can't find really good students that are great ball players. This is another example of that because this is a kid that's a borderline 4.0 student in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But that last part's why it's going to be hard. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That to me is what's going to make it hard for him to get out of the South and up to Notre Dame. But they're trying, and they don't have to worry about if we miss, we got to go on to somebody else. If they miss, you miss, right? But I think between Ausberry and Mpemba and Gillette, I think those are the 3 that they look at. Now, Gillette's the complete opposite of those guys because he doesn't fit the recruiting ranking profile that people covet. But you go look at his offer list, and you go look at his film,
impressive. Yeah.
That's not a 3-star recruit, folks. I'm just telling you that right now, Ryan. He's a 6'2", 225-pound kid that they think might be able to play rover.
I was going to say, he can run, man. He can run. Absolutely. Yes. And all of them can run. And I know Ausberry comes in a different body type, but I mean, these kids are some freaky athletes. I mean, in Pemba specifically, like he could be a guy that might be a Viper down the line, right? Like it's very possible. I mean, these kids today
Pemba could play anywhere he wants. He could play Mike, Will, Rover, Viper, tight end. I mean, somebody mentioned on the message board, like, hey, if you don't get a second tight end in this class and something happens, could you just move him Pemba over? And like, yeah, it's one of the reasons you recruit that kid, because where are you going to play him? On the field? Where?
Somewhere.
On that like 52 and a half and 100, that thing. Yeah, with the white lines. Yeah, we're going to put him on there. That's to your point, Ryan. There's 5 spots he could legitimately be a starter on both sides of the ball. The number of guys that we could say that about is probably on one hand, 2 at the most, right? Yeah. I mean, that's a rare deal.
And I know we're talking about Ausberry, who doesn't fit into this category, but we keep talking about length, right? Like, why does length matter? Because length can translate to other positions. If I have a lack of length, usually I'm kind of penciled into a couple spots, right? Like, this is kind of like where my bread and butter is. I can't really go outside of this too much. But when you have length, like an Mpemba does, he might develop into a Will. He might grow into a Mike. He might grow into a Viper. Who knows? That's why that length matters, because these guys can develop into something different potentially. That's where that growth potential works.
I want to respond to a comment here from Brandon Plensner, and he says, hey, if Ausberry's brother left the state of Louisiana, so can Jaiden. We're not saying he won't leave the state of Louisiana. We're saying, like, when you're that deep in the South, I mean, and look, the only thing south of Baton Rouge is the Gulf of Mexico, right? I mean, so there's not a whole lot more south than that. It's hard to get them out of the South. It's not so much getting them out of LSU. I mean, LSU proved this year that they've proved for several years now. this isn't a shot at Brian Kelly, but part of the struggle that Coach O was having late was he was having trouble keeping kids in Louisiana. And it's more about keeping them in the South, because you say his brother, Austin, left the South, and he did, but he went to Auburn. Like, that's not exactly like leaving the nest, right? Like, he still is like, that's like a state over. It's like, I think it's like Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, like kind of like right there. That's a drive, not a flight across, 4 or 5 different states. So it's more about just being able to get him out of the South, more so than, he's going to go to LSU. I think if he was a given to go to LSU, he'd committed already. I don't think he's a lock to LSU. I think right now, he's a kid that's going to be tough to stay in the South. But there's only one reason Notre Dame has a legitimate shot with him right now, and it's the fact that he's a phenomenal student. And I think there's that interest in Notre Dame now that Notre Dame has a full staff on board. My view may change, Brandon. And look, I mean, that's kind of part of the reason we're fired up about Notre Dame hiring Al Golden. Ryan has an article that's going to come out tomorrow that he wrote about Al Golden's history as a recruiter. I mean, there was a class of Virginia where he signed 2 5-star players at linebacker in the same class. The problem, however, is they were both from Virginia, Ahmad Brooks and Kai Parham. Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, it's one thing to do that. It's nothing to go down to Louisiana. But could Notre Dame be in the game? Yeah, I think they could be in the game. And we had a comment from Tyler Longbreak. He says, Freeman and Golden in a recruit's house is going to be dangerous. And I think you're absolutely right. That's why we're talking about Jaiden Ausberry. That's not why we're not just ignoring him, because we think Notre Dame's in the game, but it's just right now there's a lot of schools are going to have to overcome. But they're in the game. I think he visited this summer. Him and his brother visited this summer. He's been on campus, and I wouldn't be shocked if he comes back again. Notre Dame's in the game. Let's make sure everybody understands this isn't an Anthony Hill situation. It's just right now. If I were to list the 3 schools he's most likely to end up at right now, Notre Dame's not one of them. That's just being honest. But that's the good thing about where they are at linebacker, because they can keep on him and not have to worry. Because, like, normally, here's the deal. Let's say Preston Zinter would have followed his brother to Michigan. Okay. Notre Dame would be in a situation now where they'd still have to be recruiting guys, because numbers-wise, they're not where they need to be yet. So you have to have a bigger board to make sure you get at least your numbers needs. You can't really take a lot of risks. Because you have Drake Bone and Zinter, if you strike out, you're okay. You're fine. But that allows you to play the long game, right? And that's the key. That to get a kid like Jaiden Ausberry, more often than not, kids like him, kids like Anthony Hill, kids like Mpemba, kids like that, kids like Gillette that has the offer list that he has, they tend to be long game players. right? Like
Sure.
their recruitment's going to take some time. They want to take visits. They want to do the officials and all that. Notre Dame can play the long game at linebacker now because of the fact that they had such a great 22 class and they're off to such a great start in 2023. So that's the key.
Brian, I wanted to pull up this question just because it goes along with what you guys are talking about. JoJo says, I heard on Twitter, Jaiden Ausberry has locked in a visit to Notre Dame. He's shorter than ideal. Would you guys oppose if he wanted to come or go after someone else?
Oh, God. If Jaiden Ausberry wants to come to Notre Dame, Ryan.
I was going to say, if we're answering the second part, I mean, Jaiden Ausberry would be a take today, right? And I think would be a take for the staff, not just for myself.
Jaiden
right?
Ausberry is a take for Notre Dame whenever he wants. Like, if Notre Dame, let's say Samuel Mpemba commits to Notre Dame, just for argument's sake. Say, hey, they're done. They're going to keep recruiting Jaiden Ausberry. Like, this kid is a dude. And the other thing about Jaiden is, and this is the reason I talk more about him and then maybe some other players is, I think Jaiden's a fit at Notre Dame, which you don't often say about a kid from Louisiana, right? Baton Rouge, Louisiana, especially. But when you find that fit, the Jerry Tillerys, the Logan Diggs, the Lawrence Keys, you got to really go after that guy because those guys tend to, once they really get up and get around the program a lot more, they're like, wow, they're just going to click a little bit more. So you recruit Jaiden Ausberry until he tells you to stop recruiting him. I mean, and even then, I may still like just occasionally shoot him some DMs and text. But no, JoJo, if Jaiden wants to come today, I'm bringing him in. If we, if we as a looking at it from a Notre Dame coaching standpoint, if we get a third linebacker, and he wants to come later, I'm still taking him. I mean, he's just a kid you don't pass on. And the whole shorter than ideal thing, that's to me, that's more prominent if I'm an NFL team than if I'm a college team. At the end of the day, in college, it's still a lot about can you play ball or not. And there's a lot of guys that don't fit the profile that are darn good college football players. And I think you have to balance those two things out effectively. You want to have your prototypes and you need to pursue those, but at the same time, you need to be willing to open things up to say, hey, look, this kid doesn't fit the mold of what I normally look for, but he's just too good to pass up. I mean, Kyler Murray fit no one's mold as a quarterback. But sometimes the guy's just too good to pass up, and that's how I feel about Jay. You guys may not feel about him the way that I do. He's a 5-star player to me. He just doesn't have 5-star body. But as far as his ability to run and hit and his instincts and his playmaking and all that, everything about him except his 6'205" screams 5-star to me. Oh, and by the way, as I mentioned again, he's a borderline 4.0 student, if not a 4.0 student. He may be a 4. I mean, he's close in that range, I believe, from people that I've talked to. So this is the kind of kid and his brother's the same way. His brother's a very high academic. His brother liked Notre Dame a lot. It's just Notre Dame didn't really push for him. So that's the thing that makes this really interesting.
And if you're not a guy with the length, right? Since Ausberry doesn't, you have to be a guy that either makes up for those with overcompensate with athleticism or instincts, and he has both of them.
Right.
So he's definitely a take
at a high level.
At a high level. And I know the question was asking, as he locked in a visit. I saw something about it on Twitter, but I have not verified that, so I don't want to put that in the universe until I verified that myself.
Right.
All right, let's move on to the next position group in question. That would be the cornerbacks. And obviously Notre Dame has Justin Rhett in the class already. And so where do they need to go? Do they need to go? Where do they stand with the corners, Brian?
I think one is the need. I think you need two because you signed really 2 corners last year. You signed 4 the year before, but one of them's gone, so you're 5. I think 7 in 2 years is a good number situation, especially since some of the corners on the board in the 2021 class or sort of projects that haven't really flashed yet. So I think 2 is the ideal number. They would take a third if it's the right guy. They would go to 3. And again, that's the benefit of this being a bigger class is you can go beyond your numbers if the right guy wants to come. So I think 1 is the minimum. I think 2 would be the ultimate goal because from what I'm told, when Notre Dame goes to a nickel, they want to have the ability to play nickel on a consistent basis with 3 corners in the game. So not just, you can play nickel with a safety, but they want to have the ability against teams to line up and play 3 corners all game long. And that requires a certain skill set, but it also, you got to have some numbers too, right? And I think that's why I think this is a really pretty strong corner year from what I can tell so far, Ryan. There's a lot of depth at the position. And I think it's just like last year was a really good corner year too, in my opinion. And Notre Dame tried to tap into it. They got 2 good ones and then obviously lost on Dante Moore. But I think this is another year where Notre Dame's going to look to take advantage of the depth in the class and say, hey, look, we're okay if we just get 2, but we'd like to get 3. I think that's the mindset that the Notre Dame coaches have, which is why their board it's a weird board, Ryan. Like there's some guys on it that they like, but then there's some other guys that I don't know if I like as much that they seem to be pushing for a little bit harder. It's a really I think there's some different coaches have different priority lists when it comes to corner. Sure. You know what I mean? So it's a really strange board in my opinion, but there's some guys on it that can really, really play, including Ryan, the guy they already got, and Justin Redd. And I think you and I did a film breakdown of him. We talked about he can play both field and boundary. And the fact that he's not locked into one, I think gives the staff a lot of flexibility on who they combine with him in the class.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say they have a great baseline. That was the first thing I was going to say with a guy like a Justin Redd, because this kid has he's a borderline top 50 player by depending on what platform you look at, but he's got top 50 slam dunk talent level. Like this kid's a legit 4'4" kid with length and athleticism. So, and he plays at Bishop Gorman, so he's relatively, he's well coached for his level of competition and as a junior in high school. So lot to like about a guy like a Justin Redd, and then mixing in with guys. And we've heard recently Micah Tease is a guy that's big on Notre Dame's radar, a guy that they really like coming out of there. He's kind of been looked at as he's right in Oklahoma's backyard a little bit, right? So Oklahoma's kind of been like the assumed, they got to be in on Micah Tease. And he's a guy, if you look at he's at Booker T. Washington out in Oklahoma, really good program, plays wide receiver, defensive back, and was watching his film a little bit, Tease, and I really thought, Brian, I don't know if you agree with me, but I thought from a athleticism perspective, I really thought that he surprised me a ton with just one, he's got very good recovery speed. Now, he's not the longest kid in the world, but he is around 5'10", 5'11", nice recovery speed, but really good zone awareness. I think he's a really smart football player, and he's just got a propensity for turning the football over and making big plays, whether it's on offense or defense. So a guy that I think is very high on Notre Dame's radars, a guy that I think also likes Notre Dame a ton because I've talked to him, and they're definitely within the top for him. He said if he doesn't have a top of the board right now, he said if he did have a top, though, Notre Dame would be right at the top among the leaders. So Micah Tease, I think, is a guy that's super interesting. We got guys like Braxton Myers that are up top. That I'm a big Malik Muhammad fan. I think that Notre Dame should still keep pushing there. And I know you agree with that one, to say the least. Like, he is a dynamic press cornerback that I think also could work inside at nickel, could follow, receivers all over the place.
He'd be the best corner they've signed in over a decade, in my opinion, if they were to get him.
High praise.
Yeah. I
love that.
I don't know who you would say is higher than him. I mean, coming out of high school, I don't know if there's anybody I would put in that conversation. Booker T. Washington in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I feel like there might have been a couple Notre Dame legends that came from there. There's this running back. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. We had him on the show one time. Guy named Reggie Brooks. You guys ever heard of him? Played running back in Notre Dame a long time ago.
Sorry. Yeah.
It'd be nice to get back into Tulsa and get some players because, that's a very underrated city when it comes to producing talented players.
Agreed.
They don't produce a lot, but, I'd be curious as like the number of players that come out of that area that become really good college football players. I like Mike, and I think he's a little longer than he is tall. Which I think is part of the reason they're still looking at it. He's not super long. He's not like, 35-inch arms, but I think he has some length to him despite not being a real tall guy. The other thing about him is there's a guy, Ryan, on our board that I chat, with about recruiting off the air, and he loves Micah Tease as a receiver. He likes him more as a receiver. There are other people that like him more as a receiver, and I think that just goes to that whole, you're bringing in a guy that can play. And I think that's something that Notre Dame is looking for. And obviously Christian Gray from St. Louis is a guy that they like a lot. He's a player that they like. I like Christian Gray. Ryan, I want to get your opinion. I'm not quite as high on Christian Gray as maybe some others. Like Rivals has him as like a borderline top 100 player. I'm not quite there with Christian Gray. I think he's good. I think he's long. I think he's instinctive. But I feel like he athletically doesn't really move the needle athletically from where they are. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I was going to say he's kind of, for me, a guy that just checks a lot of boxes, but he's like he checks a lot of things, but he's not kind of like a master of no given trait, right? Like there's just nothing flashy about him. I think supreme consistency with a player like him. I think that he's super dependable. But I mean, when you're talking about projection, right? Like a Justin Rhett could be a star if he is developed properly, right? A guy like Micah Tease, you mentioned, I mean, I think this is a legit 4-4 kid. I think that, like you said, some teams are like, wide receiver, because he led the team in receiving on a really good football team playing both ways, led them in interceptions, and he's a track guy as well for the program. I mean, he can run a little bit, man, and there's
a higher ceiling there, right?
Yes, from an athletic perspective, because I think he's also quick-footed with being straight line fast. A guy like Micah Tease, and I mean, there's a school that I talked to somebody close to him, and there's a school that wants to recruit him as a safety. So team see him all over the place a little bit.
I mean, he can hit. I mean, that kid can come down. And don't get me wrong, I like Christian Gray. I think he's a top 200 caliber player. I just kind of view him as a lot like what Notre Dame gets relatively consistently.
That's fair.
Good player. I'm curious about the ceiling. I do think,
however, he reminds me of, not to cut you off, but he's longer, but he reminds me of like KJ Wallace a little bit, like it's solid everywhere.
I think KJ had a little bit more suddenness, but that's also because Christian has got longer legs than KJ had. It's a little easier to be sudden when you got those short legs. That's a good comparison. And I'll say this, I'll feel a lot better about Christian Gray if he's the third corner in this class, because where I really like Christian Gray is I like him in the slot. That's where I really like Christian Gray. I think if he can be like more of a full-time like slot player like Tariq Bracy was for a lot of this year, then his value to me goes up. I don't love him as much like out on an island outside by himself. That's really where I'm like, and what I mean by that is we're talking about recruiting to win a championship. Right? Like Christian Gray can play. Don't get me wrong. Christian Gray's a good football player. But I'm more looking at it like, okay, when you go play Bama, are you going to want to put him on an island against the next Devontae Smith or Jamison Williams? I don't know if I want to do that. Put him in the nickel with a safety behind him. I like that because he's a physical kid. Right. That's the thing I like about Christian is he's a tough kid. He's a physical kid. Also plays both ways, which I love. So, I want to make sure that people understand where I'm coming from with him. He's a good football player. I just feel like Notre Dame's at the point now where the Christian Grays, I know exactly what you're smirking at. I saw it. The Christian Grays, to me, I feel like you can get guys like that relatively consistently in Notre Dame. You can't get the Malik Muhammad's consistently. You can't get guys like that consistently. And, Caleb Presley's another guy that I know they're trying to get in with from out in Washington. He's another guy that I like as a kind of a big safety, big corner type of outside physical type of guy that could be a really good boundary safety as well. So I think the board is interesting. And I don't know if I feel super confident in that they're going to get anyone other than maybe Christian Gray. So there's some work to be done there. There's definitely some work to be done there at cornerback in this class.
I mean, I'm not going to make it.
I meant to say Devin Moore. I said Dante Moore. You can just tell I got Dante Moore in my brain.
But I mean, who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Right?
Devin Moore.
Vince is going to wear a Michigan shirt for it. So,
I mean, I'll do what I got to do.
All right, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
I'll call up my big brother Mike Elston. I'm sure he's got some stuff he can send my way. It might look like I'm wearing my dad's clothes, but that's okay.
Vince, when did you get those Michigan PJs, man? What?
That are like 6 inches too long, and that just whatever. Yeah. All right. Anyway, one more position to talk about before we jump into some questions that I've been kind of going through here on the side. Safety. Safety for Notre Dame is a very interesting spot, I think, right now, Brian. What say you about safety?
They're off to a pretty darn good start at safety. I mean, in a lot of years, Adon Schuler's your best safety recruit. In a lot of years. There's a chance in this class he could be third. He's already second. And that's so like people don't talk a lot about Adon Schuler, right? Have you ever noticed, like when we start talking about Notre Dame's committing, we rarely hear Adon Schuler mentioned as a guy they're excited about.
And afterthought, man.
He can play. Yeah. That kid is a good football player. I love Adon Schuler. And then you look at Peyton Bowen. Obviously, Ryan and I talked about this when we did the film break. If you haven't seen the film breakdown we did on him, you got to check it out. But we popped into film, and that kid got special talent. I don't have him as a 5-star yet because I think he's still kind of raw, but he's got 5-star physical tools. And I'll be shocked if by the time he's done with his career, I haven't bumped him up to a 5-star. I just tend to try to be really picky with giving juniors 5-star rankings, which is why I don't hammer rivals for the fact that they don't have like 30-some 5-stars yet. Now, they do it because I think more just for effect and clicks and all that. But if they do it for the right reasons, then I'm on board with it. Like, you got to earn 5-star status to me. You got to really show some things. But, man, I love Peyton Bowen's talent. So, I mean, you start off with those two. Again, if you don't get another safety in this class, they're okay. I mean, numbers-wise, they're okay. But they want a third safety in this class. There's no doubt about it. They'd like a third safety in this class. But it's going to have to be a guy that they can really play. And, of course, Ryan, there's one name on the board above all others that you talk about what would be the dream scenario. It's unlikely, but there's one guy on the board that, man, if this staff could somehow pull this off, it could be special.
Yeah, and
no, I'm not talking about King Mac.
We're not talking about, I was going to lead into King Mac in a second, man.
It's not who I'm talking about.
That's your boy.
I love King Mac, but that's not who I'm talking about.
I need to give you your St. Thomas Aquinas fix, man.
That's
to get
right.
it for
No,
you.
it's not. I'm not a big Aquinas guy, to be honest with you.
No?
Like, I see a lot of those guys go to college and they don't quite pan out quite the way that guys, some other places do. It's just more about I love King Mac. I think that kid can really play.
It's fair.
But
that's fair.
No, that's not. This kid's a little bit further north, one state up north is the guy that I'm referring to.
Yeah. Of course, we're talking about Caleb Downs once again. Joshua Downs, wide receiver from North Carolina, his younger brother, 6 foot, 185 pounds. He is, and I put this on a podcast, so it's out there in the universe. If you ask me who I thought was the best football player, regardless of the positional value stuff, right? Because you talk about how much quarterbacks mean to a program, all that good stuff. This might be the best player I've evaluated so far in the 2023 class, man. You have a hard time trying to poke a hole in what Caleb Downs can do as a football player, as a free safety, as a strong safety, rolling up, playing in the box, playing middle of the field at times, playing split field, like playing man-to-man. Like there's just so much that this young man can do. And I think what you already have now, and we can't overlook the two guys that are already in the class, like Brian said, everybody just is not giving enough credit to Mr. Schuler. But man, my New Jersey guy can play some football. And he is a nice too-high guy that plays. I mean, he plays the alley with reckless abandon. Yes. He plays a physical brand of football. You need players like him on your defense. And then it makes so much sense from a stylistic perspective because then you got a guy like Peyton Bowen, who when we're talking about 5-star upside, the range is just silly. Like he is technically speaking, it needs to get more consistent in and out of his pedal and just kind of being a more proactive football player. But when he turns and unlocks his hips and just starts showing off that range, the kid can cover just a ridiculous amount of ground. Like it's just unfair at times. Like he has range on the back end where he could be a true free, like center field type free safety. He's got that type of special to him. So now that we have that, now that Notre Dame has that baseline, again, a baseline, let's go for a guy like a Caleb Downs, right? Because this kid is special. Could you imagine if Notre Dame has the ability to have Caleb Downs and Peyton Bowen on the field, and then Adon Schuler comes in 3 safety looks? Like that is just a ridiculous kind of thing to think about for a second. And I'm looking so much, and it's, again, is it likely? Probably not. But right now, you've put yourself in a position at safety where if you're class A today, Notre Dame is in a great spot. You're in a great spot, not a good spot, a fantastic spot if you sign the 2 players that they have right in the class right now. But the fact that you may have a chance at a guy like a Caleb Downs, at least take the shot, really take a swing, that's what, I mean, it gives you so much hope because you can put all your attention now in the safety class on a guy like a Caleb Downs.
And I've been told that if they get a third safety, because there's some other guys on the board. I mean, there's some other guys on the board from Notre Dame. Jair Hill's on the board for Notre Dame from Illinois. King Mac's a kid they've looked at. I think Ryan Yates is a guy they like more as a safety than they do as a corner. The kid from Texas who's a teammate of Peyton Bowen. They like all those guys. And they're not going to wait for Caleb Downs because what I have been told by multiple people is, I don't care when Caleb Downs decides to come. If we have 4 safeties in the class and Caleb Downs decides he wants to come to Notre Dame, we're taking Caleb Downs. I mean, you always have room for a top of the board guy. I mean, and to your point is that's how you compete for championship. It's not just getting those guys, but not being so stubborn like, well, we met our numbers. Sorry, Caleb, you don't have a spot. No, yes, You have a spot no matter. I would say, hey, look, man, if you pick another school and you go there and you don't like as a freshman year, you still have a spot at Notre Dame. I'm just saying, because legally you can say that when a kid hasn't signed somewhere. I mean, and that's
absolutely.
You're going to see more and more teams doing that. Like, hey, just so you know, if things don't work out, if you don't pick us and things don't work out, keep me in mind, kind of thing. But that's a dude right there, Ryan. I mean, that's a dude. And if you're someone who cares about recruiting rankings, I mean, those are the kind of kids too that help you solidify that top spot. Because I've always said I don't think Notre Dame's ever going to have a number 1 recruiting class. This class is making me a little nervous when it comes to because I don't like being wrong. But if it's wrong about something like this, then I'll take it. And this class. It has a chance because there's just so many highly ranked guys in the class, and there's so many highly ranked guys still on the board that they have a legitimate shot at, or at least an outside shot at. I think that's the thing that makes this unique. But, you said something at the very end there, Ryan, and this is kind of how we wrap it up. When you've started with, I mean, you could make a case that a Don Schuler would rank 6th in this class amongst the committed players, just on defense. When you're sitting here in February and a Don Schuler is your 6th best defensive commit, you have a phenomenal defensive class being worked on, right? And when Preston Zinter's 7th, I mean, Preston Zinter used to be what Notre Dame would get first when it came to recruiting. And I was trying to find an article that I did relatively recently about this class, because the how quickly they're getting. So first of all, to put it into perspective, just when you look at the first 9 players that they got a commitment from and compare it to any other of the elite classes that Notre Dame has signed, like the 2011 class, the 2013 class, the 2021 and 22 classes, those are the 4 composite top 10 classes that Notre Dame had. And you compare it, it's like this class is just so much better. So, and they're off to such a fast start. And this is what I had in the article. I finally found it. Yeah, at the same stage last year, Notre Dame had just 6 commits each of the last 2 classes. And last year, they didn't get their 7th commit until March 4th. And then they ended up getting their 9th commit by March 17th. So that's a month from now.
Yeah.
The year before in 2021, they didn't get their 7th commit until April 15th. And they didn't get to 9 commits till June. And that was the 2021 class that finished as a top 10 national class with Tyler Buckner and Blake Fisher and guys like that. And so when you look at that, I mean, in past years, they didn't get to 9 until the fall, just because. But it's unfair to compare that to, because the whole filling up early is really a decade old thing. That wasn't how it used to be. But when you look at the start that they're off to, I mean, it's an unreal start. Here's some numbers from that class. As I mentioned, all 9, and this was before Rivals came out with their new top 250, because they had 8 of the 9 at the time were top 250 kids, but all were 4-star recruits. Here's some comparison, right? So all 9 are minimum 4-star recruits. 2 of them are composite 5 stars, Drake Bowen and Keon Keeley. So if you look at Notre Dame's past great classes, right? So I think the 2 best besides 22 and 21 were 13 and 11. The 13 class ranked 3rd. Through the first 9 commitments of the 2013 class, which again finished 3rd, Notre Dame had just 1 top 100 commit. They've got let me see, composite wise now, I think it's Bowen, Vernon, Keeley, I think are the only 3 that are composite top 100s right now, correct? Bowen. So they got 4 top 100 guys, I think, right now. And you look at that year, they had 1 top 100 commit and just 3 total top 250 commits on the composite list. I think they're like 7 or 8 right now. If you look at the 2011 class, they had 3 top 100 commits and just 1 more top 250 commit. And so they had 1 more 5-star, but less total number of guys. And those were 2, like, to me, top classes. If you look at the 2008 class, which the class that ranked number 2, if you remember that class, finished the ranked number 2, through its first 9 commitments, they had 2 5-stars. That was Kyle Rudolph and Dane Christ, right? They had 2 5-stars, but then they had 4 more 4-stars, and then they had 3 3-star commits. And they had, I think, 3 – they had 3 of the 9 were top 100 players compared to 5 now. I mean, so again, you look at the start that Notre Dame is off to with their first 9 commitments, and they're way ahead of schedule from even top 5 classes that Notre Dame assigned.
Crazy.
And but the final piece is, and here's what hurt the 2021 class. I remember, Vince, when they were ranked number 1 really early, and they had like 5 commits. They were ranked number 1 really. They had Tyler Buckner and Blake Fisher.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was like a pretty highly ranked class. Gabriel Rubio was in that class already. The thing we said was, but there's just not a lot of big time guys left on the board. Like Deion Colsey committed early, Blake Fisher committed early. I mean, not Blake Fisher, Lorenzo Styles committed early. It's like with the exception of Prince Colley, all their big name guys are already committed. And there just weren't a ton of big name players left on the board. You know, where you say, yeah, they get, even if they got like their top 5 guys left on the board, they probably still weren't going to stay number 1. If you look at this class, there's a legitimate, they don't have to do the inside straight to stay number 1. You have to hope that they don't drop their kids that they currently have. But when you look at the number of top 100 receivers on the board and Dante Moore and all the offensive linemen, I mean, that's the other thing is Notre Dame rarely has this many kids committed and 0 of them are offensive linemen.
Yeah. I mean, there's only 2 offensive recruits in general. That gives you a lot of hope. It's like with all these new coaching hires, there's going to be a little bit of a boom on the offensive side of the football at some point. I know somebody put in like, are we worried a little bit? Yeah. Not right now because
they just hired the whole staff a week ago. You know,
just hired the whole staff. I mean, if there's such high opinions of this class right now, when it's pretty much just a strictly defensive class right now, just wait till we start getting some of these offensive guys in.
Because the difference is, for all the turnover, you still had Marcus Freeman, you still had Chad Bowden, you still had Mike Mickens, and you still had Chris O'Leary. The first one being the most important. You still had Marcus Freeman. So you could still go get kids. You could still, I mean, they got Peyton Bowen since after Brian Kelly left, right? They got Preston Zinter after Brian Kelly left. Like, you know, they were able to add, not just maintain, but they were able to add to it because of Marcus Freeman. Offensively, it's a different deal because they had so much turnover. I mean, you got rid of Dell and Jeff Quinn, and then you lose Lance Taylor and John McNulty. And when coaches leave for jobs like that, clearly they were looking. We talked about this on the show. John McNulty wasn't even like at one of the visit weekends, right? Like he had been out on the road doing his job, but like when you get an offensive coordinator job, clearly you're looking for those things, which is fine. I mean, good for them. I've got no problem with those guys getting promotions to being coordinators, but that takes time. It takes investment of your time to pursue and land an offensive coordinator job in the ACC. So clearly their time was being distracted, and that's not a criticism. I hope people understand that. They picked the right time to do that. It's like once the season's over, the early signing day is passed. Now I got to look out for me and what my goals are. So they did it the right way, in my opinion. The point is, however, to your point, Ryan, it's hard to put a recruiting class together when you don't have any coaches. Right. And Absolutely. So that's not the case anymore. So, and again, that's also why I put out those numbers, because Notre Dame is way ahead of schedule right now from where they've ever been at this point in time. Normally they're like 4 or 5 commits. If they only had 5 kids committed, 2 on offense, 3 on defense, no one would be like, what's going on with the offense right now? It'd just be like, yeah, okay. Right. I don't even think Bama has 5 kids committed right now. I think only Bama's got a couple kids in the class. Ohio State doesn't have many kids in the class. Notre Dame's way ahead of schedule. The offensive staff is going to be fine. Right. It's just the defense is so good right now and so far ahead of schedule that it's just kind of, it's like making the offense look bad, but in reality, they're fine. As I mentioned, nobody else has more than 6 top 250 players according to Rivals.
Yeah.
Notre Dame has 5 in the top 100. They're all on defense. Right. So just be patient, right? And when you have that kind of turnover, it's going to take a little bit of time. So I'm not concerned about it. But Vince, let's get to I just wanted to kind of throw that out there so we can get to some questions before you got to get out of here.
Yep, and that's actually going to be pretty quickly. But I have starred a bunch of questions, so let's head over and start at the top. Here we go. Real quick, Brian, what are your thoughts on Tommy's comment about not knowing where he'll be next year? Folks all over are freaking out about it, and Sean wasn't thrilled about it either.
I think it's being taken out of context. I took it as more of a I'm not worried about next year kind of thing, as opposed to I'm not sure I'm going to be here. I don't do the soap opera stuff, man. So I'll go back and listen to it again. It didn't strike me as something that concerned me when he said it.
It didn't strike me when he said it either.
So, I think people are kind of reading into the events of what happened. And Ryan, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I kind of feel like it's turning turning nothing into something. Just kind of because I didn't take it. I didn't take it the way that a lot of people are taking it, which, I could be the one wrong on that, but I didn't take it that way.
I didn't even hear Tommy's comments, so I'll refrain from even commenting. I'll just say, you've kind of put it out in the universe that long term, Tommy Rees might have other aspirations outside of Notre Dame. Sure. So it just is what it is.
As
we'll see what
most coaches do. And it's not so much outside of Notre Dame. It's like he wants to be an offense in the NFL and he'd like to be a head coach. Well, your head coach is 36 years old. I mean, that job's probably going to be taken for a while. So, we'll see. We'll see.
We do have a super chat from Corey that I want to make sure that we get to. Thank you very much, Corey. This is off topic, and I apologize, but I'm worried about NBC's interest in the Big Ten. What does it mean for Notre Dame? Are you worried too? CBS or Fox?
I don't get too worried about stuff like this. Like, Notre Dame's going to be fine. I mean, someone's going to want Notre Dame.
It actually might even work out better for Notre Dame in the long run.
If anything, for me, it revives my dream because right now CBS doesn't have anybody. Right, except the American Athletic Conference, right?
They lost the SEC.
They lost the SEC, yeah. And my dream of every Notre Dame home game, beginning with the CBS college football song, is alive and well if NBC goes against Notre Dame. I hate NBC's coverage of Notre Dame. Hate it. I don't think NBC is a strong sports network. It's why they have one NFL game a week, right? Go to one of the networks that is throwing out more dough. Get more money, because the thing I've read is what they would, in order for them to get the Big Ten, they're going to have to pay the Big Ten more than what Fox is paying them, which is $50 million a year. That would blow away what they're paying Notre Dame. The look that would be is if the Big Ten's getting paid this and Notre Dame's getting paid 20 something. Notre Dame would tell NBC, I would hope, to go pound sand. But again, it revives my dream of Notre Dame being on CBS so that every game can start with the CBS college football theme song. I mean, how's that not a win for Notre Dame? I'm saying somewhat sarcastically. I mean, the win would be financially, but for me, we
don't see any of that coin. So, it is what it is.
That would be tremendous.
Scott McDonald has a comment here about Al Golden. With how quickly it became official, Golden had to have accepted the job 7 to 10 days ago, right? Otherwise, why'd the other coaches take so long to be announced?
It's not about when you accept the job. It's about when you begin the vetting process.
Right.
Al Golden wasn't the only defensive coordinator, from what I understand, that was vetted. I can tell you with 100% certainty that Al Golden did not accept the job 7 to 10 days ago. Everything I told you is true. And I was very clear to say he was not officially offered the job. Right? But this is who Marcus Freeman wanted late in the process. This was not decided a month ago. It was a situation where the process was started, just like Jared Parker got announced somewhat quickly.
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
East Stand.
It was 2 days.
Because
3 days.
That vetting process began before, because there was another position that they had considered Jared Parker for, because he wanted Jared Parker on staff in some capacity.
Right.
Freeman did.
Right.
So the reason
he was a wide receiver coach.
Right.
So there you go.
He did not accept the job 7 to 10 days ago.
Right. Okay. This is another one about Big Ten, so I'll pass that one up. I apologize.
I hope Notre Dame takes it as a slap in the face and uses it to go somewhere else, because I hate NBC.
Yeah.
I don't hate NBC. I don't have anything against NBC. I hate NBC's coverage of Notre Dame football is more of what I mean by that. I have nothing against NBC compared to anybody else. It's just whatever.
Garrett, let's see. Will Al Golden have success pulling kids from the South, such as Florida, Georgia, Texas, etc.?
Ryan, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, no, I think so. When you're talking about Coach Golden's ties, right? He was a football player at Penn State. Then he goes down at University of Virginia, eventually as a defensive coordinator, like Brian kind of alluded to. He comes up to Temple. He goes down to the University of Miami. He's been in the NFL with Cincinnati. Before that with the Detroit Lions. So I would say he has shown that he can to answer the question directly, I think he can, yes, because I think that he's shown that he can attack different areas of the country. It's not just one region that is exclusive to a guy like Al Golden. He has shown that he can pull players. If you go back to some of his Miami, and I have an article coming out about this, like Brian teased a little bit earlier. I think he said going to come out tomorrow. And it's going to talk a lot about, hey, when he was down specifically in Miami and he had kind of a lot more resources, even though they were under sanctions during those years, he was pulling top 10 classes and not
especially
just
early
Florida
on.
kids.
Yeah, especially early on.
Yeah. It was 3 straight years, I think, where it was top 12 finish according to 24/7 Sports. And he was pulling kids, and it wasn't just from Florida. He was pulling kids from all up the East Coast, pulling some kids from out, moving a little further west. So, yes, I think that he can recruit nationally. I think he can recruit in different regions. I don't think this is just exclusive even to just Florida, Georgia. I think he can extend up to Texas. I think he can extend up to the Northeast. I think that he has reach as a recruiter. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, I mean, you look at some of those classes. His first year at Miami, they landed Jalen Grimble from Las Vegas. He was a guy that they went out and got. So I mean, yes, they got. I mean, Miami's always going to get a lot of Florida guys. But to your point, they did have success going outside of the state of Florida and getting kids. And again, early on, I think the success you had at Miami early on was a lot better than what it was later because of, again, it was the fact that they were dealing with sanctions. And, that was something that really kept them, to me, kept them from really getting to their full potential as a program. So, but yeah, I mean, we could go through and point to all those guys, but look, and the reality too is those connections where they help you when it comes to building relationships with coaches, more so than the players. It's with high school coaches and getting high school coaches on your side and having, being with you as part of that. And I think that's really where your success, more of your success comes from. And so at the end of the day, recruiting success is, and again, it's also changed, right? We got to remember we're in 2022. We're not 1982 anymore. That's not said as a shot. It's just that things evolve. And the reason being a good recruiter in a state was so important is because, as we mentioned the other day, there weren't the recruiting services and the ease of travel and everything being digital. You had to have connections down there because that's how you found out about players. And that's why we talked about this the other day. That's why you'd have regional recruiters that would go down there and just drive from school to school to school to school trying to find players because it wasn't as easy to find players. You can find players now just from sitting at home, or sitting in your office watching film, getting on the phone, doing Zoom calls, like things like that. Now, you still have to get out and go, but there's not as much of that, as far as finding players. Now it's like, we know who we want. Let's get on the road and go get them. And so I don't think the need to have a guy from Texas, a guy from there. Now, you need coaches that can recruit those areas to a degree, but it doesn't have to be someone from there. If you have the chops to be a great recruiter, meaning personality, work ethic, organization skills, the ability to form and build connections and relationships with players, with parents, with coaches, with guidance counselors, with all that stuff, then you can be successful anywhere. It may take longer to really establish those connections early on, but it doesn't mean that you can't have success. I mean, I would point to Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman spent his entire career in the North coaching. Kent State, Purdue. He's coaching in Ohio or Indiana his whole career, I believe.
Right.
Played at Ohio, from Ohio. Look at his impact nationally over the last year at Notre Dame. I mean, you're getting kids from St. Louis. You're getting kids from Virginia. You're getting kids from Texas. You're getting kids from Florida. You're getting kids from Arizona. I mean, you're getting kids from California. You're going all over the place to get defensive players because it's just a different world. Why? Because of all the things you talked about, the personality, the genuineness, the work ethic, the organization, the ability to sell yourself, the ability to sell your program. All those things work and all those things play up. So I think those are the things that you look into. Here's another one about Coach Golden. I'm assuming Coach Al Golden has reached out to the defensive recruits, especially Keeley, Drake Bone, and Vernon. He needs more interior or flex guys like Moore. I don't know if he's reached out to all of them per se, but I'm sure they're in the process of doing that. I don't want to say they have reached out because we don't know, but I would assume it's something that's going to happen relatively quickly.
Yeah, if I could just a little context to that, Brian, I did talk to Don Schuler pretty recently, and he said that he was in the process of speaking with Coach, and he's kind of just talked to some people close to the program. I mean, I know there's a lot of moving parts when a coach gets hired, right? There's press conferences.
Especially when he just had a game on Sunday.
Right, exactly. I mean, so it's been pretty busy for Coach Golden over the last few days. But yes, he is in the process of making his rounds, and I'm sure that all that will be taken care of very soon here with the committed guys.
Yeah. James Skeeter, let's go Irish. So where do y'all rank our defense this year? I assume you're talking about the defensive class right now. I mean, there's not a better one on the board, just from combination of volume and top level talent. So here's an interesting question for you, Ryan.
Yep.
From Jim Mayernich, who's the top 100 player that our coaches think we lead for? My wife won't let me join the chat. It's okay. You don't have to pay to get a question asked, but that's kind of funny. So who would I think there's a couple, but who would you say is a top 100 guy that the Notre Dame coaches think that they lead for? Or not, let's I'm going to audible it. Who do you think is a top 100 guy that Notre, because coaches tend to think they lead for a lot of guys. I mean, that's just the nature of it. But who do you think? And we can share the scoop that we put on the board yesterday, the message board yesterday, since it's a day old now.
Well, I'll lead into a couple guys. I'll say, I mean, he's a borderline top 100 guy. I think he might have top 100 guys. And that's why it's such a tough question, because some guys are top 100 guys and then other guys are, 250 on other platforms, right? So it's kind of hard to distinguish who's a top 100 guy. But I think Monroe Freeling is a top 100 guy by at least one platform, the offensive tackle.
There's two that have him in the top 100.
Yeah, so he's in a couple platforms as a top 100 guy, offensive tackle out of South Carolina. And he is a really talented kid. I would say right now that I would peg Notre Dame as his leader. Now he's going to do his due diligence. He's still going to take some visits, do all that good stuff. But I think that Coach Easton has done a great job with him early on in the process. I think they were in a good, solid situation with him before Coach Easton was even hired. And I really think that the staff likes him a ton. So Monroe Freeling is definitely one. Like Brian was kind of alluded to, Braylon James, the wide receiver out of Del Valle, Texas, who is a 6'3", 175-pound wide receiver. I have a little bit of I have a breakdown of him coming out tomorrow a little bit with him and Jaiden Greathouse, who's another wide receiver down there that Notre Dame I know has been talking to. And Braylon is a high academic kid. I think it was a 5.0 on the 5.0 scale.
Yeah. Which is just amazing that just miraculously this year, there was all, in last year, there's all these 4.0 students that are ranked in the top 100, like Dante Moore and Braylon James. It's just amazing to me. I'm sure it's a total coincidence. I'm sure it has nothing to do with there's a coaching staff that actually works hard now to find those guys. I'm sure that's not it. It has to be a coincidence that there's all these top 100 players with great grades that care about academics.
Has to be.
Because, when Marvin Mims, who's a pretty stud receiver at Oklahoma, when he committed to Stanford, I'm sure he only had a 2.2 GPA, which is why he flipped to Oklahoma, right? I'm sure that's it.
Right. That's the only way it happens.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure.
So Brian put some intel on the board. So basically, high academic kid, Texas A&M and some of the other Texas schools are obviously hot on the trail as well. But he's big on Notre Dame. He's big on Stanford. He's a high academic kid, really talented football player. Comparison-wise, he obviously the body isn't filled out. He reminds me a little bit of Des Bryant. I don't know if you love that comparison, but I just see it from a physical ability to win above the rim. I would call him more explosive than maybe long speed type of guy, but I really think that he is a really talented football player who, he has told us, he has told to Irish Breakdown that Notre Dame is right there, man.
And his coach, the intel was too, his coach thinks Notre Dame is the leader. Right.
Sure.
Part of that is the academics. The other part of it is Chancey Stuckey's been recruiting this kid for a long time.
You're
right, because he was recruiting him at Baylor.
Yep.
I can't remember what show it was, but Ryan, you and I recently were talking about those when we started to see this plethora of long receivers come into college football, sphere, and a lot of it had to do with a lot of shooting guards that were getting converted to receiver. Braylon James is the prototype of that. He is that guy because he's still a really raw player, but he is. I think the word you used the other day was springy. I think is the word you used, and it fits it correctly. It's a great way to use it. He's just now scratching the surface, and he's already top 100 recruit in my view and in view to several recruiting services. I think two of them for sure have him in the top 100.
They do, yeah.
But he is a big time player. I don't know if I paid enough attention of Des Bryant in college, and definitely not in high school, to be able to go with that comparison. It's a lack of really studying Des Bryant's game.
It's fair.
But he fits a lot of what we see in college football. He fits, to me, I don't know if I would go T. Higgins is not a good example because I think T was smooth and not real explosive. This kid to me is more explosive than T was. I'm trying to think of a good comparison, but I mean he's more Justin Ross than he is T. Higgins in my opinion.
Yeah, because I wouldn't say that he again is like the most straight line fast guy, but like off the line, man, he's explosive and he can stack. He can get on top of some guys.
To me, when I watch him, because you see, here's why I say what I'm about to say.
Sure.
I think he has a lot of speed potential, and I'm not even talking about weight room speed potential, like which a lot of long kids have. They get into a college program and they work on the lower body and they get that explosiveness. I think when you see him on kick returns. You see that speed more, which tells me the reason we don't see it at receivers because technically he's still not – his game hasn't evolved where he's able to utilize that full speed. Because on kick returns, it's like I love watching kids run down on kickoff because that's the one time in a football game we get to see kids for at least 20 yards run as fast as they can.
True.
Right? Because a lot of other times in football, you're not able to just run as fast as you can. There's got to be a method to your madness, right? And to me, when you see this kid really turn it loose on a kick return, like, oh, okay, yeah, there's some juice there. And I think part of me as a receivers coach, I look at and say, well, there's a lot of technical things I'd want to work on with him. And there's a lot of untapped potential there. So that's why I would say that, Ryan. I agree with what he shows on film and what you're saying. He's not like, he's not a guy like, oh, boy, that's a 4.3 guy. Right. But like to me, he's faster than a Miles Boykin. He plays faster than like a Miles Boykin played. He to me is a guy that I really like the kid. I think the kid brings a lot of potential to the table. And I think if you talk about an outside tandem of him and Cardinal Tate in the class or him and Tobias Merriweather with a Rodney Gallagher inside, I mean, that's when you start getting into that dream class scenario. Because and I love the fact that Notre Dame is recruiting so much diversity from a skill set and body type standpoint of receiver. I think it's phenomenal. But he's a top 100 guy. And here's the thing, he hasn't visited Notre Dame yet. He's going to come up in March. I mean, when you're in that good of a position with a kid before he visits, that's pretty good. Now, is he on commit watch? We're not saying that. I agree with your Monroe Freeling. I agree with that one, Ryan. I think that's a good one. Trying to think of like I think Samuel Mpemba is not a guy that Notre Dame leads for anymore, but at one point in time they did. He's a top 100 guy. I think they have a good shot with. I think Jason Moore, I would say, would
like
be the
top
other one.
two-ish, right?
Yeah,
like
I would say if I had to pick one, I'd put them ahead of Penn State right now. I'd put Notre Dame ahead of Penn State, but it's a lot closer than I'm comfortable for. Like compared to Monroe Freeling, I think they're, to me, kind of definitely there. I think with Braylon James, according to his coach, they're definitely there. But I think what I would focus more on right now, to John's question, is it's not so much that Notre Dame leads for guys. It's right now, because a lot of these kids haven't visited yet. It's, are you in that top 2 or 3? That's where you want to be when these kids come in to visit. Are you in that top 2 or 3 with some regional schools? And I think that list is a lot longer for Notre Dame than the lead. And I think that would be true last year. When they first offered Jalen Sneed last year in January, they weren't immediately his leader. That evolved over time, and there's going to be a lot of kids on the board like that. And here's another. Here we go down a couple more. David Lowe, is anyone else as a Notre Dame fan actually worried about offensive recruiting? We kind of addressed that.
Yes.
Garen Knutson, I wonder if Kyle Hamilton going in the top 5 will influence Downs at all.
I think it'll influence every safety, right? Recruit. I think just from a safety perspective, but also just defense in general, right? Like when you see a guy that goes top 5, that's going to kind of like, wow, this team this program can really develop the safety position, especially. I think it would influence Downs. I think it would reaffirm Peyton Bowen a little bit because he mentioned that to Brian Smith in a recent interview. I mean,
without being asked about it, I believe, if I remember listening to it correctly, because you're doing a story about it from the interview Brian did. I believe he brought up Kyle Hamilton without being asked, like Kyle Hamilton being a top pick without being asked. It just it was on his mind, and he said it. So yeah, that matters. That absolutely matters. BK Month. It would be funny if Notre Dame beats LSU in recruiting. Wasn't that BK's gripe? They've been beating LSU in recruiting the last couple of years. So it just, in Brian Kelly's world, it's easier to recruit there. You don't have to work as hard, which is all up about that's all right up Brian Kelly's alley. He's way more time for golfing, and he can golf more year round in Louisiana than he can in Indiana. Joe Aribe, I would love for Notre Dame to go to Fox just so games could be called by Gus Johnson. That would be Gus is interesting because I feel like he's either you love him or you hate him.
I love Gus.
I love
Gus.
when Gus. I mean, Gus could make a 10-7 game sound exciting and up tempo. I mean,
absolutely,
like that's a skill. I mean, football's a game of passion, not just players but fans. And I absolutely love listening to Gus. And if he was always calling games for the team that we cover and root for, that would make it even more fun. You know what I mean? Like the best Gus Johnson Notre Dame game, in my opinion, was the 2015 Notre Dame Stanford game. Because remember all the big plays in that game? You had Will Fuller with that bomb, Josh Adams had a 60-yard run, CJ Sanders with the 90-yard kick return. Like, that's some big plays, and Gus made those big plays exciting. I mean, go back and listen to his call on the Will Fuller touchdown alone, and then on the counter play to Josh Adams. Like, Gus was fired up about those plays. I mean, I think he makes the game fun. Robert Didoff also has a comment. He goes, Brian, I agree about CBS being better, especially their sound is much better quality than NBC. Even 30 years ago, CBS's sound was better than NBC. I agree with that. I mean, because I grew up, NBC, even before NBC took over Notre Dame, NBC did AFC football games. And I always thought CBS games, even though I was a Broncos fan, so I watched more NBC games, but my parents were Redskins fans, and they would obviously, most of their games were on CBS. And I always thought CBS was just a better production. I mean, obviously having John Madden and Pat Summerall doing big games for all those years was big, but it just felt like a better production, better camera angles. Just, I don't love the NBC production. I never have. They're always tinkering with it, and every tinker they make is like worse, makes it like worse than it was before. They're so focused on being unbiased that it's like they become like sometimes the opposite of it. Although I never felt that about Drew. A lot of people say Drew Brees was biased. I thought Drew Brees did a great job this year.
That's fine. He was fine.
I enjoyed Drew. And because I've listened to some of the games after the season, I thought he did a really good job. David Solomon says, good call, Brian. The only constant is change. The TV networks aren't any different than the apparel companies out with Adidas or whoever. Nike and Under Armour, et cetera, are waiting. I hope Notre Dame never goes to Nike. We've got one here from Q Kibbs. Yesterday, Freeman talked about how much he relied on Tommy for the offensive hires. Therefore, was it Tommy who wanted to make a change with Dell and Quinn? Not that it really matters, just curious. I think one for sure Tommy wanted to make. I think the other one took a little bit more convincing. And I'm going to leave it at that. But yeah, I think by the end, Tommy was on board with changes that needed to be made. Here's one, Ryan. Big Jim asks, how did Ryan negotiate the giant microphone as part of his signing deal?
I didn't have to negotiate it, my man. I had it already.
That's a camera angle thing, guys. Ryan has the same exact type of microphone that I do. It's just Ryan's on I believe a laptop, so it's just more of a camera angle thing. But I thought that was hilarious. So, like, okay, Ryan, we've got the money right, we've got the work schedule right, but this dang microphone is keeping us from signing this deal. Fine, I'll give you your giant microphone. There, you happy now? So that would have been a fun conversation. That would have been a fun conversation. All right, and I think. I'm just going through some of the questions here, and I think that is going to be it for our questions. Let me just get down here towards the bottom. Hey, here's David Knight said this. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. David Knight says, I liked Mike Mayock. I loved Mike Mayock. Ryan, what did you think of?
Yeah. Oh, as a draft guy, I loved Mike Mayock.
No, I mean, as doing Notre Dame guys, doing Notre Dame games when he was doing Notre Dame games for that short period of time.
No, I always liked Mike Mayock. I thought he was very authentic and very easy listening. Like, some guys just try too hard, right? Like, I just thought it kind of flowed very easily for a guy like Mayock. Like, he was a football guy, right? Like, he just talked about ball, and it wasn't like over the top where he was just like agenda pushing and just talking too much when he doesn't have to talk. Like, it just I thought it flowed really well with a guy like Mayock.
Here's a couple. I loved Mayock. I had a feeling you were going to say that, but I just wanted to be sure. Michael says, this is more of a comment. Ryan, your energy and enthusiasm is very entertaining when you break down recruits, as well as when your inner Kuiper comes out. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Colonel Klink's Monocle, one of my favorite names, and had a chance to meet Colonel Klink's Monocle in the airport after the Fiesta Bowl. So it was great meeting you. Who is the one recruit? This is Ryan. I'm going to kick this to you first. Who is the one recruit? I'm going to read this slowly so you can think about it. Who is the one recruit Notre Dame isn't really in on that you would love for Notre Dame to sign? So I'm going to say in on, or at least right now they're like sort of the bottom. They're not really like a favorite for him right now.
I guess Nicholas Harbaugh would probably be a guy that comes to mind out of Maryland. So he's a kid that, again, 6'5", 225. Notre Dame was recruiting him as rover. I think they're still going to keep in touch, obviously, but he's a 5-star caliber kid, depending on the school, wide receiver, tight end, defensive end, linebacker. He kind of can just play wherever he feels like, to be honest, because he's 6'5", 225. And for the track and field people out there, he ran a 10.31 verified 100-meter dash, just ran sub 21 in the 200. The kid is a freak, to say the least. Like, there was a video that was like, is he the next Jadeveon Clowney, or is he the next Calvin Johnson, or is he the next Vernon Davis? Like, who knows, man?
Like, pick a track star. I mean, he could be that too. Pick an Olympian.
Like in a ideal world, I want to put him on the defensive side of the football with Marcus Freeman in this staff and just see what happens. Like, I don't care what position you peg him at. So he would be the guy, just because I think that, again, possibilities would be endless. And if he's a guy that you're like, actually, no, he could be the next great tight end after Michael Mayer, that's fine. Throw him out there. Like, I'm good with it. So
mine would be AJ Harris, the corner from Alabama. That'd be mine. I think AJ is such a Notre Dame kid. He's just been convinced by other schools that he's not a Notre Dame kid, that, you don't want to go to class and do all, it's too hard up there. But he, in a lot of ways, is a Notre Dame fit, and he is a stud. He's the best corner in the country, in my opinion. I think he's the best corner in the country. So that would be one I would love. Ashley Hill, off topic, Brian. This 53-year-old man is finishing his MDiv in April. I know you studied. Go Irish. Yeah. So I wasn't pursuing an MDiv. I was pursuing a master's in Christian studies. So I was going to get into campus ministry, stuff like that. I wasn't going to be a preacher, because I don't have the temperament to be a pastor. I don't have the Holy Spirit hasn't quite changed me to that point where I could do that. But yeah, congratulations. I know it's very spiritually and physically and emotionally and mentally taxing to go through that process. So certainly be praying for you. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. Jimmy M says, mailbag question, thoughts on moving Patelho to H-back, some nastiness as Tommy T in the blocking game. I'm almost saying it's not right now. He doesn't have nearly enough discipline for me to put him on offense. I could just see him like running right past the dude he's supposed to block, as that guy comes in and blows up the quarterback running back exchange. I mean, that's going to be the big thing for him, is just a lack of discipline in everything he does. Until that changes, he's always going to be a guy we're talking about. Well, what about here? What about here as we try to find him a home? When in reality, he can play wherever he wants if he gets his head screwed on straight. And that's going to be the thing here. John A1 with a super chat. Thank you, John. You talk about skill diversity at receiver. How does that look at other positions that like the strong side end? Are they looking for guys just like Riley Mills? You want to take a shot at that one first?
Yeah, no, I think that goes back to, if you heard earlier in our show, we were talking about maybe the ability to have guys like Jason Moore and Brendan Vernon play strong side defensive end, but be interchangeable type of players. I don't think that there's one player. I don't think there's one style that necessarily fits. I mean, ideally, right? Like, you want length and you want size, and Riley Mills kind of fits those. I think he's like 6'5 plus, 285 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. So, like, he certainly looks like a strong side defensive end. But then there's guys like Myron Tagovailoa-Mosa, who was 6'2", 260, that did a good job at strong side defensive end. So I think there is some interchangeableness to the ability to play a strong side defensive end. It's just more about temperament and the ability to just, kind of just do some of the dirty work at strong side defensive end and play from a little bit of multiple alignments at times. But I think in an ideal world, you are going to recruit guys that do look similarly to Riley Mills, because you want that length, you want that 6'5", you want those long arms, and you want some decent weight behind them, but not too much weight where you sacrifice the ability to be flexible and to be an outside track rusher at times. So you don't want to sacrifice the athleticism, but having that body type certainly is a big plus at the position.
Right. And I think that there are certain traits that you look for, like ability to play and execute certain things. I think the difference between saying receiver and strong side end is in one instance, you're talking about one position. In the other, you're talking about three. And that's where we talk. When we talk about diversity from a receiver standpoint, we're talking about like guys that play multiple positions. We're talking about a guy that can play W, a different skill set to play X, and a different skill set to play Z. That's like saying I want a certain skill set to play strong side end, a certain skill set to play Viper, and a certain skill set to play 3 technique. It would be more of that comparison as opposed to 3 different type of strong side ends. And so it's not quite the same kind of comparison, but I think in regards to that position, it's like looking at like a W. There are certain things that a W has to do. He has to be able to do this, and this as a receiver. A strong side end has to do this as a defensive end. Now, the different types of body types or physical skill sets that can perform those traits is going to vary. And that's where that diversity comes from. Adetokunbo Ogundeji and Riley Mills are different in a lot of different ways, but they both, I think, have the potential to play that position at a high level. And I think you look at Riley Mills and Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa, very different size, strength, athletic skills, all those type of things. And so both for the same position. So yes, I do think there's some diversity, but to Ryan's point, if you were to draw up a guy in a lab, he would look a lot like Riley Mills, and then you'd maybe want to add a little bit more, some athletic traits in a couple areas there, right? I think that's kind of the thing that you would look for in that. But like you said, length, power, quickness are the first 3 things that pop in my head. Here's a comment from Timeout Tom. I really like the enthusiasm shown by Coach Mason, and the recruits just must respond to him. I can see him as an outstanding recruiter. I agree. I loved his energy. He's the anti-Brian Polian, which is about the nicest thing I could say about him.
Yep.
That's the greatest compliment I could pay.
And as a special teams coach, right? Like you got to have that little bit of energy to you, right, man? Because you're trying to convince
real,
kids
Ryan.
To run
That's the
down.
thing. It's like it's got to be real. Like you could just tell he's like that kind of kid where like when he grabs a cup of coffee, you're like, dude, you may not want to do that, right? Like, you just kind of wake up like, what a beautiful day. I'm just ready. Open up the curtains. I'm ready to go. Like that's like seems like how Brian Mason is, right? And it's genuine. And I'm with you. I absolutely love it. Like I just feel like that's how a special teams coach should be. And I think he's going to be much better received by the special teamers than the previous special teams coach. And I think you all know I wasn't a huge fan of him. Stymie Snurdly says Gus and Brady Quinn on Fox would be sweet. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Jake Piper agrees. Gus and Brady would be so nice. So yes, that would be fun to have Gus Johnson doing the play-by-play and Brady Quinn doing the color. Not that I have anything against Joel Klatt. I think I like Joel Klatt a lot more doing games than I like him giving opinions on shows and on Twitter.
That's fair.
Like
that's fair.
So Keegan McLaughlin, Mayock, and Breeze were good. Just wish we could get a Notre Dame guy to do our games, but understand they use it as a training ground for Sunday Night Football. That's one of my biggest beasts with NBC. It's like they treat Notre Dame as like their minor leagues. This is where we send guys to practice to get ready to do our Monday Night Football. Or Sunday Night Football? Is that what NBC does now? Sunday Night Football? Yeah. Correct? I do feel that. Like, let's have him practice at Notre Dame so he can come up and do this. And that just
you're not wrong.
Yeah, just bothers me. Here's another question from Corey D. Is there a top-ranked guy who wants to go to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame isn't recruiting as hard as they should? That I don't really that wants to come to Notre Dame. I don't like top-ranked.
I don't. Not that I could think of.
I mean, the only thing you could say would have been maybe some of the quarterbacks, maybe Jackson Arnold, Chris Vizina, maybe.
Right.
But the thing is, as they should, I don't think they should be recruiting them harder. Like that's the thing is, I can't name a top 100 guy that I'm like, man, what Notre Dame's dropping the ball here. I think that kid, you could get him if you went after him. I don't know if I have a guy in mind for that, Ryan.
I don't think so either. No, I'm trying to like scan my mind. Like, I don't have a good one for that one either.
Last 2 here real quick, and we'll do one here from Logan Lawrence and both of you guys' opinions. What are your realistic expectations for Tyler Buckner? I'm trying my best to stay on board. Just seen too many head scratcher passes last season to be all in on Tyler Buckner. I'll let you go ahead and touch that one first, Ryan, because
I think Notre Dame is going to be a lot better than maybe the majority of people believe next year to start with. And I think that's going to be a lot about what Tyler Buckner brings to the game, not only as a because I think Tyler Buckner is going to be a lot better passer than people think that he is. If we're talking about like what our prediction for stats are, I'm going to say high 2000s passing. I'm going to say somewhere 20 to 26 touchdown passes, somewhere in that ballpark. But I think the big thing that Tyler Buckner gives to you is the extension in the run game, man, is an added bonus. Like it is going to be such a big thing to have the ability to pull off of zone and power and, have the read off of it, both as a passer and a runner. So outside of the passing numbers, I think that you can pencil in another 600 plus yards rushing potentially and double-digit touchdowns, maybe 8 to 10 touchdowns. So I think we're talking about 30 plus total touchdowns, well over 3,000 all-purpose yards. And I think that Notre Dame's going to be a good team. And I think that Tyler Buckner is going to be a big reason why.
I don't understand. Like, I don't know what the expectations were for Tyler Buckner. Like, did you think he was going to come in and complete like 90% of his passes? Look, Trevor Lawrence is the unicorn, right? Like, Tyler Buckner completed passes at a higher level, threw for almost 3 times as many, well over 2 times as many yards, 3 times as many touchdowns as Bryce Young did as a freshman, right? And he played in much higher leverage situations. Tyler Buckner threw some passes. You're like, that wasn't a good pass. Yeah, okay. He hadn't played football in 2 years. He also threw some gorgeous passes that I think get ignored from this group. And the other thing too is he was put into play a certain role. And at times he was put in a role that they hadn't prepared him for. The Virginia Tech game, for example, he did not practice that week to run that offense every single snap. He got thrust into that because the offense wasn't moving with Jack Cohn early in the game. And if you look at what Tyler Buckner did the first quarter he was in the game, he went 5 of 8 for 101 yards and led them to 2 touchdowns as he turned a 10-0 deficit into a 14-10 lead. That's what Tyler Buckner's capable of. But it feels like that a lot of people have completely forgot that first quarter and then look at the second half when Virginia Tech was able to make adjustments for a true freshman quarterback who had never been put in that situation before, and they look at the bad throws he made.
Sure.
Right? And it's just kind of like I think your expectations may be the problem, not what Tyler Buckner showed. Because I think what Tyler Buckner showed last year was some really impressive skills that a kid who hadn't played football in 2 years is going to be able to build on. Now, is he going to get to the point where he can turn all that into production? I don't know. We'll see. Right? Because he's still, we think he can be really good. My expectations for Tyler Buckner this year are that he can be the starting quarterback for a top 5 caliber team. That's my expectations for Tyler Buckner. At times, he's going to do it more with his legs. I think he's going to be the opposite of Trevor Lawrence. And what I mean by that is Trevor Lawrence early in his career was a thrower that built running into his game as he got older. Would you agree with that evaluation of Trevor Lawrence?
Absolutely.
Brian? Like more of a pocket guy early. I think Tyler's going to be the opposite. They're going to utilize his legs early as he get him comfortable in the offense. As he gets older and older and becomes more comfortable with running the passing parts of the offense, you're going to see him be used less as a pure runner and more as a quarterback, a passer scrambler. But it's going to take time. And my expectations are that Tyler Buckner is going to be a playmaker next year for Notre Dame, a dynamic playmaker next year, a guy that can beat you with his legs and his arms. He's also going to be a guy that's going to make some interceptions. You're like, oh, why did you throw that ball? It's going to happen, folks. And if you're ready to bench him at that point in time, I would say the problem isn't Tyler Buckner. It's your expectations of Tyler Buckner because he's going to make some mistakes next year. He's also going to make some phenomenal throws.
You need him to, though, because again, he had the injury, right? And then he missed his senior year. He needs to make some mistakes. He needs to understand what his limitations are. Well, not limitations, I don't want to call it like that, but he needs to understand what throws he can make, what throws he should not try, and that'll kind of dictate the comfortability of him as a passer. So yes, I agree.
I'll say this, Ryan, to your point. If he only throws 4 or 5 interceptions next year, it means that it's a problem because it means he's not being aggressive. It means they're not being assertive with him as an offense. I've said this before. I hated Ian Book's 34-6 touchdown interception ratio in 2019 because I would have liked to see him take more chances because I think it could have been a 40-10 situation as opposed to 34-6 because he was on. I think like 19 of his touchdowns came in like 4 games. And to me, when you're young, I want like you don't know what you can't. It's like I don't know if you can make that pass or not because you've never tried it. Hey, you've tried that and you can hit that pass. And you know what? Here's why you threw that pick. You threw it late. Right. You didn't lead him. You threw it early, whatever the case may be. Look, because if you take away the interceptions, sometimes, especially early, then you're going to sort of neuter him, right? And it's kind of like, I remember all the flack that Sean Watson took in 2016. Oh, turns the ball. Part of the reason he turned the ball over because he was just I'm going to take chances. Those chances also led to over 50 touchdowns and a national championship, right? And so I think we need to understand that Tyler isn't a developing quarterback. He's not going to look like a senior next year, but I don't care. It's part of the evolution process, and he can absolutely be the playmaker on an excellent team. And that's the nice thing about Notre Dame's offense is he doesn't have to put everybody on his shoulders in 2022. It's like, look, man, you got Tyree, you got Diggs, you got Estime, you got Lindsey, you got Coles, you got Styles, you got Wilkins, you got Davis. Oh, and by the way, you got this dude named Mayer that you can throw to, and you got a pretty good O-line. Like, just let's run the offense. And when the time comes that we need you to step up and make a play, let's go make a play. But I'm much higher on Tyler Buckner, and I thought Tyler Buckner did a great job this year. I think he was better than what I thought he was going to be. I think the problem is so many people expected him to just win the job and be Tyler Buckner. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is a freshman. That then it's like there was no way he was ever going to live up to those expectations. And we tried to warn y'all in the spring because he was great in the spring. We tried to warn y'all he's playing against third teamers, right? But some people didn't want to listen. They're like, oh, look how good he was. And he was playing against third teamers, right? Mm-hmm. It's let him evolve. He's going to make mistakes, but stick in there because the kid can flat out play. He just needs more experience. But I think if you think Tyler Buckner didn't play well this year, then I would say the issue was more about your expectations for Tyler Buckner than I would say anything in regards to what Tyler Buckner did this year, in my opinion. And here we go. Here's a recruiting one I want to get to. Oh, here, let me do the recruiting one last. Mm-hmm. John Ridge says, if you could pick one play-by-play and one color guy historically to call a Notre Dame game, who would that be?
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
That's tough.
I'd still go with Gus as my play-by-play guy. I love the emotional energy. He's one of my favorite all-time guys. He is.
Yeah, you heard my reaction to Gus earlier. I love Gus, man. I've always loved Gus. I
think Brent Musburger from the 80s was pretty good at calling games.
He was.
I like 80s, early 90s. I thought he was pretty good. I did not like Keith Jackson. He was very anti-Notre Dame. I love the voice, but he was very anti-Notre Dame, in my opinion. Yeah. Color guy. I mean, like I said, I like Mike Mayock. Because I love the technical aspects of it. But
I liked Breeze too. Like I could dig with Breeze.
Yeah. I think I feel like people feel about Mayock like how I feel about Tony Romo. Like, I think Tony Romo, I've listened to some games he does, and he's really wicked smart, but sometimes he's kind of, it's like, dude, just shut up and just let me watch the play. You know what I mean?
Like, some guys are a little too high energy. Like, that's why I said I liked Mayock, because it's like he just lets it come to him, like he doesn't try to force it too much. Right, exactly. Someone said John Madden. Of course, John Madden's a classic, right? Like, can't go wrong there.
He's not doing Notre Dame games.
Right.
He's not doing Notre Dame games. Yeah, that'd be fun. Gus Johnson and John Madden doing a game together. Could you imagine that? Yeah. That'd be a ton of fun. Irish one got in late. Jim Harbaugh gets an extension at Michigan. Maybe he did not want to go to the NFL, just more money. Thoughts on that, Ryan? Jim Harbaugh wanted to go to the NFL, folks.
Yes. I mean, to start off with, and I know that they're going to paint the picture, right, that it was just to get more money and he was always in here for the long term. But I think that it's just not completely factual, in my opinion.
So we'll just leave it at buyout money they gave him.
Yeah.
That's not the buyout you give someone that's in it for the long haul.
Right.
It makes it a lot easier for them to get rid of him after the first year. I'm just saying. And it makes it a lot easier for him to leave after the first year. So
I'm very curious to see what happens with Coach Harbaugh in the future too, because I mean, I really think if there was a year for him to leave for the NFL, this was the one. So curious to see what happens with this.
Look, he was telling people goodbye before he completely misplayed that Viking situation. Like, Ryan, you know this for a fact. I know this from several sources. He was telling people, I'm gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, so it was either the biggest psyop in the history of college football coaching contract negotiations, or he overplayed his hand. And in my opinion, I think he overplayed his hand. And I want to see the details of that contract extension before I start thinking about it being about, oh, it was just all this master manipulating ploy by Jim Harbaugh. I don't think Jim Harbaugh is that savvy, in my opinion. If John would have done something like that, I'd have said, yeah, okay, he played them. Right. He played them. Jim isn't. No, he's not that guy. Here's the last one, Ryan went on a recruiting question. Michael says, yes. Brian and Ryan, where do things currently stand with Rodney Gallagher being from Pennsylvania? I'm very fortunate to see this talented ball player, and he a football and basketball guy. I would love to see Notre Dame get this kid.
Well, Gallagher, for one, from a talent perspective, I mean, the minute I watched him as an option quarterback out there in Pennsylvania, I was in on him. I texted Brian, I'm just like, this kid's like, this is the slot that you want, man. It's going to break tackles and navigate space and just do a lot of great things after the catch. So I really like Rodney Gallagher as a football player. My most up-to-date is that the last time I talked to Rodney, he's interested in Notre Dame. Notre Dame is interested in him. He has not been on campus yet, so I think that's going to be a big layer to the recruiting right there. I would obviously not call Notre Dame the leader in the the clubhouse right now, but I will say that Notre Dame is firmly in the conversation, to say the least, and I look forward to seeing how the conversation moves forward after he gets on campus, because that's going to be a big thing for this recruitment.
So some interesting backstory. Mm-hmm. He is a guy that several former coaches at Notre Dame just didn't like.
It's bizarre.
And that's why they didn't recruit him. Kelly and Dell just weren't high on him. I think we all know why, right? I mean, they want this. Tommy Rees, I think, loves him. Chancey Stuckey loves him. So I think the current staff is all in on this kid. Like, all in on this kid. The problem is, and the good news is, they know that they have a lot of work to do, right? And that's the thing. It's like, it's one thing to just assume, hey, he's from Pennsylvania, we do well in Pennsylvania. They know they got a lot of ground to make up. And trust me, they're working hard to get it. I think if we're talking, if there's a dream class for Notre Dame, what Notre Dame would want right now, in my opinion, I think it would be Braylon James at W, it'd be Carnell Tate at X, and it'd be Rodney Gallagher at Z. I think that's who Notre Dame would like to have as their dream receiver class. And the good news is, it's possible. I mean, again, a lot of work to do with Carnell, a lot of work to do with Rodney Gallagher, got to close with Braylon, but it's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. And I think that will be that that's going to be this. Look, what I like about some of these new hires, Ryan, is some of these new hires are going to be tested by fire immediately. Chancey Stuckey is one. Harry Heestand is one. I think those two guys are going to, more than maybe any other position, immediately going to be. The reason I say that about like Al Golden and Al Washington is, like, Al Washington walked in and he's like, hey, by the way, here's your contract in Notre Dame. And oh, by the way, here's Keon Keelan, here's Brendan Vernon. you know what I mean?
Here's a 5-star in the top 50 kid.
Al Golden signs like, oh, by the way, here's your 5 top 100 players, and your other 2 dudes who are really flipping good. Whereas Harry's walking in the door with nada. Chancey Stuckey's walking in the door with nada. And I would argue that Chancey Stuckey's situation is different, because with Jeff Quinn, you've interviewed several kids who are like, hey, I really liked Coach Quinn. Yeah. And so Harry Heestand's building on that. So, like, let's be honest about, Jeff Quinn. Jeff Quinn's problem was never working. He was I never doubted his work ethic, his sincerity, his love for Notre Dame. I never questioned it. I questioned his ability.
Sure.
That was the only thing I ever questioned with Jeff Quinn. With Dell, it's a different story. I question all of it. And his work ethic is the biggest thing I questioned. The fact that you don't look at a kid like Rodney Gallagher and be like, that's a dude that I want. Man, you don't deserve to be coaching at Notre Dame at this point.
It's a red flag. Yeah.
Big time red flag. So I think Chancey Stuckey's walking into a situation where he's even got more ground to make up, where Coach Heestand walks into a situation where Coach Quinn left him with a board of players that, like, hey, you did a good job of getting us in the game. Now, the problem that Jeff Quinn had for years was he couldn't close on those guys that weren't from Indiana, right? He had a harder time closing on those kids. They loved them, but they just weren't choosing to play for him, like the Jake Taylors and the guys like that. Now Heestand has a better track record of closing on those guys, but he left them in the game with a lot of those kids, and credit to him for that. But with receiver, it's kind of like, no, you left him in a bad spot, and that's got to be overcome.
Yeah, and I would say every offensive lineman that I talked to, right, that was on the board already before even Coach Hastan came aboard, they all uttered those sentiments, right? They're like,
Right.
yeah, we love Jeff. I love
Right.
Jeff Quinn. Like
Right.
unprompted too. Like, oh, we had
Right.
a great relationship with Coach Quinn. I got to
Right.
talk to Coach Hastan. Samson Okalola was one that was like, I just haven't talked to Coach Hastan yet. I love Jeff Quinn though, and all of them
Right.
reiterated that. The
Right.
wide receivers. You didn't hear that, man.
No.
Like you just heard, like I like Notre Dame, or
And if they
I have a
mention a
good
coach,
relationship with
they
Notre
mention
Dame.
Tommy Rees.
Right.
When
exactly.
they do mention a coach, they always mention Tommy Rees. It was never Del Alexander. There wasn't one kid in the 2023 class who was like, man, I was really bummed to hear that Coach Alexander left. They're like, wait a minute, what? It was a lot like when Brian Van Gorder left. I remember when we would interview recruits and like, yeah, I remember, I think it was Bo Bauer, who was a linebacker. It's like, yeah, I never really talked to him much. This kid had been committed to Notre Dame for like a year.
That's
you know,
crazy.
and that's the deal. So yeah, now Harry Hiestand has since talked to all those kids. He went out and visited Sampson and he went and visited Monroe. But Ryan's talking about when he first got hired, obviously there was the time between. But that's, I mean, look, if Harry Hiestand signs an elite class, Harry Hiestand's going to get a ton of the credit for it. But I do think a sliver of the credit does need to go to Jeff Quinn as well. I do.
Sure.
If Chancey Stuckey signs a great receiver class, I give the previous receivers coach zero credit for making that happen. It'll be Chancey and Tommy. It's going to be because of those two. And Coach Freeman, obviously, is the head coach. And that's the difference between the two scenarios that they're both walking into. Even though neither of them have a single commit, they're walking into completely different situations, in my opinion. If we're going to be fair to Jeff Quinn and the work he did, and I think we need to be, right? Like, I think we're both completely on board with him needing to go, especially me. Like, it was time for him to go.
Yeah.
But I've never questioned his work ethic, ever.
Yeah. And I know when obviously the hire of Coach Stuckey came to be, right? Like everybody's talking about like he doesn't have a resume as far as recruiting because he had only coached 1 year, which is understood, right? But if he goes out there and he does land a class that is somewhere in the ballpark of a Cornell Tate and a Braylon James and a Rodney Gallagher, then those answers. If you get two of those three, then you're like, okay, I got you, buddy. You can do it. Yep. We're good. We're good to go.
Yep. Sold. Absolutely. So I think that's a great way to end. Ryan, thank you for being with me today. Michael, that was a great question, buddy. I appreciate that very, very much. Thanks to everybody for joining us today and sticking with us through this show. A lot of fun. We'll be back tomorrow for our Friday free-for-all mailbag. Before you leave, do not even think about leaving yet. Hit the like button, subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Built Bars. You got to get some Built Bars, people. If you haven't done it, you got to get the Built Bars. They just came out with the banana cream puffs are back. I love those things. They're more like, Ryan, they've got, like, have you ever had any of the puffs? I think we talked about this the other day. You've never had the puffs, right? They have like it's like a more marshmallowy flavor on the inside. Mm-hmm. I don't normally like those, but their banana cream ones are really good. I actually just ordered some, and then they've got strawberry now. So I ordered some strawberry and the banana cream puff. And when they bring cookie dough back, which is like, it comes and goes, I'll buy like 5 boxes of the cookie dough. Like, they're phenomenal. But Cherry Barcia, I love. The coconut almond, I'm a big fan of. So a lot of great flavors. And
peanut butter brownie.
I haven't tried that one yet. I need to get that one because my wife loves peanut butter. She loves peanut butter. So I'm gonna have to get that one for her and have her try that. And of course, if you sign up for the message boards at irishbreakdown.com, you sign up for a month, which is $4.99 a month, which is much cheaper than the other sites. Some are offering $1, but that goes up after your trial period ends, right? We're $4.99 per month. It's not going to change anytime soon. You also get 10% off your entire merch store merchandise. You can get hoodies like this. You can get like Ryan's wife I got her one of the blankets, right, Ryan? You said she really likes it, right? Got mugs, all types of fun stuff in the merch store. His daughter's got some Gap clothing, right? Yep. Onesie, yep. Wife's got a hoodie, and you can see obviously Ryan's got the flag. So tons of cool merchandise. If you sign up for an annual membership at $49.99 a year, you also get 20% off your entire purchase. So you definitely want to take advantage of that. So anyway, for Ryan Roberts, I'm Brian Driscoll. Vince was obviously with us earlier. Thank you all so very, very much for joining us for the Irish Breakdown podcast.